So welcome everybody. New steering committee members and previous steering committee members of the Vermont Climate Council. Thanks everybody for joining us today. As usual online, there's an agenda and everything. Before we get going, Secretary Clauser, is there anything you'd like to say? I'd be happy to walk through the agenda if you want me to do that.
Yeah, no, walking through the agenda sounds great, David. I think most of it is kind of process and procedural stuff in an hour and a half. So we'll get right to it.
Yeah, okay. Sounds good. All right, so it's in the chat. It's here too. I'll share my screen so folks can see it. And welcome everybody who's joining us as well. Observing our meeting today. All right, so the things we're trying to do today, one is basically sort of look out over the summer and leading up to a September climate council meeting and sort of do your work plan as a steering committee and think about how you want to take advantage of the 2 months you have in front of you. So it's kind of a planning conversation there. The next thing that we wanted to invest the most time on today is what folks have asked for some time now, which is the process for updating your sort of guiding document called the process roadmap document. So we're going to spend a little time talking about how to do that and probably collect a little bit of initial input as well about what needs to happen there. And then finally, we need to end by making sure we're clear about dates and how you all want to be doing your work. If we can schedule that out even through the end of the year would be helpful. So that's what we're trying to do today. It is, as Secretary Clauser mentioned, pretty process heavy. So let's see if we use the full hour and a half. Perhaps we're super efficient. We don't need that. Before we get going, typically we would approve minutes, but even before I do that, any questions about agenda and what we're trying to do today? Any friendly amendments to this agenda? Okay. All right. So then we've also got linked in the agenda the minutes from the last time we spoke. So let me just pause and say, any questions, concerns about minutes the last time? Anyone need a moment to go through them? All good? Any concerns about those minutes before we just treat them as approved? Okay. Not seeing any concerns or any requests for a little more time. Let's treat those as approved. Thanks so much. Okay, I'm going to leave this up just for a second because I think these bullets are helpful as we're going forward here. And so the first conversation we want to have is specifically about the next 2 months, July and August, and how you all want to be using your time, making sure that we're doing the work that we think needs to happen to prepare for the fall. These are the bullets that have been suggested, but honestly, I want to sort of hear from the 5 of you. And actually, I just realized that Julie's not on. Hear from you all about what you think your priorities should be this summer. Do these bullets look like the right ones? And any quick reactions you all have about sort of the priority use of your time over the summer. So let me just pause there for a second and say, do these look like the right things to be doing over the next few months? Really focusing on making sure that biomass writing group is moving forward and that you are helping to shepherd that towards a review by the council. And then the second bullet about the governance document, which we'll talk about at 8:45 in more detail. Let me just pause. Does this sound right? What's this missing? Jared?
Thanks, David. I think this sounds right. On the second bullet point, kind of my recollection from our in-person meeting and my feeling about it is that that's really kind of step one of two, which is, I think that we had said, we need to do some work planning for the council, but before we can have the full clarity we need on how we do that strategic planning, how we put that work plan together, how we put that timeline together, roles and responsibilities, we do need to go back to the process roadmap. And because there were some areas where we didn't have clarity, things that needed to be added. So I think this is right, but I would add, after we do the proposed updates to the process roadmap, that then flows into a work planning process for the council for the next year, including some timeline pieces, working backwards, especially from the responsibility to craft the next climate action plan. The other thing I would just note as a question is I'm seeing reference to the September meeting. I don't see online in my calendar invitation a date for that. I just want to be clear. We haven't set that yet. Okay.
That's correct. And I
So
think
it's
that's
steering committee meetings and council meetings that we need to schedule going forward.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Jared. That's helpful. Graham?
So the first bullet point, finalized timeline for biomass recommendations. Should we also add the transportation recommendations, since that's the other big piece that needs to get done?
I would say let's pose that to your fellow steering committee members. Like, if we need a quick memory jog of what happened and where we were at. But yes, right. We did adopt recommendations. The council did adopt recommendations, right? At the end of last year. And those recommendations included a bunch of work that was going to happen this year, right? That's my memory.
Yeah, no, I think we said when TCIP became non-viable, we noted that in the plan and said, we will figure out a replacement for that. And that I think is an important part of what we need to get done this year.
Great. Okay. Secretary Moore.
Just we did adopt an addendum to the plan that spoke specifically to transportation. So I'm not sure if additional work was envisioned in that space outside of what we will be doing to update the climate plan for July of next year.
Right. Right. So I think that's the question, right? Which is fundamentally, is there something that needs to be done before then, or is that become part of the update going in to July 2025? Right. I think that's on transportation. Jared and then Liz.
Yeah, I would just say, from my perspective as a member of the transportation task group with Bram, and then on the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, we put forward recommendations to the council in terms of an interim approach on transportation that kind of narrowed the area of focus, but that was never put forward as the final recommendation. I think certainly the transportation task group and the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee saw that as step one, and there needed to be further work and refinement to hone in on an even clearer and more direct recommendation. So I think that needs to be part of the work plan for the next year. I don't know as though we have an exact timeline on that, but I think that was seen not as a final recommendation, but as a step towards a final recommendation along the way.
And Jared, just on the question that Julie brings up of you know, if we're trying to sort of focus the time of the council, is this an issue on transportation where essentially we should focus our timeline on making a very robust revision going into, you know, July 2025? Or is this something that requires the council to act sooner than that?
I think it's likely the latter, but we're going to have to see how that timeline plays out. I mean, part of it is the uncertainty around what's happening with our regional partners and therefore what opportunities will be available on what timeline. But yeah, so I think that it needs to be a part of the work plan. That's certainly been the way that the Transportation Task Group has and the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee have spoken about it. Is continue. The Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee has said that transportation policy recommendations are the top priority for our work plan, and that we need to continue refining and honing those.
Okay. Liz, were you going to talk about this issue, particular transportation?
I was going to go back to the overarching bullets that you had, but
Okay.
as a consequence, it sort of encompasses transportation.
Yeah.
My comment was going to be that I feel like the first critical, primary, whatever task is actually the second bullet, and that while it's ensuring that the working on the biomass happens, there's not, I hope, not much of a steering committee role there other than to make sure it gets on the next agenda and that it's complete. Whereas the substantive task of this group, I had understood to be that second bullet point. And then to Jared's point, after we've gone through and made any changes as needed or expanded, because I suspect there's things just aren't covered yet in the process roadmap. After we've done that, then I think it's really going to the subcommittees, the established subcommittees, and asking them to finalize their work plans, which gets to this issue on transportation, just as an example. It feels like the conversation we just had really, in the first instance, needs to happen at the cross-sector subcommittee and as a part of their work plan. So at any rate, just kind of, I would vote to keep the steering committee's tasks squarely on sort of process and administration first and foremost, so that we head into the next cycle with a really good sense of the process, because we heard, I think a number of comments the first go around when we were still feeling our way through regarding the process. And it would be great to both remember those, learn from them, and incorporate them in our documents before we go into the next cycle.
Okay. Thanks, Liz. Yeah. Julie?
I was going to say much of what Liz said is I think we need to update the process roadmap before we start talking about work plans for subcommittees. And so see that as the most sort of urgent, and agree that it's central to the work of the steering committee. But I think we need to get that locked down before thinking about technical work that different parts of the council may take up.
Okay. Great. And thanks, Kelly, for weighing in there in the chat. All right. So that's really helpful. And if that is the case, then it sounds like July, August, the priority is that overall process roadmap, that sort of learning from the past, crystallizing that into a sort of governance document. I wonder, is there more to say about this besides, and we're going to talk at the very end of the meeting about scheduling meetings, but in addition to just sort of like scheduling that up, what I'm hearing from you pretty clearly is that that's the priority, right? Get that process stuff right. Okay. All right. Well, that's a pretty good segue into the next piece that we're supposed to talk about, which is precisely that document. And how you all want to work together to update that document. There's a bunch of detail in the agenda about it. The other thing I will mention is the version of it that's linked into this agenda and up on the website shows that there's comments in there, but I at least can't click on those comments. Unlike in the Microsoft Word version, I can, but in that PDF, I can't. So if others are having that same problem, we can probably repost a PDF or something like that, where you can see the comments in there. But let me pull up the agenda again, because there's some real specific questions that we developed going into this meeting about the kind of conversation we hope we could have right now. And so there's some definite choices here for you all about how you want to go about updating that document, right? And we think that there's, again, like some writing that needs to happen. And who does that writing? And then how you go about reviewing that is sort of bullet point number one, right? So there's 3 options there in bullet point number 1 that we put, and there could be others, right? This is just sort of us thinking aloud of what this could look like, right? That a handful of you could go off, no more than 2 could go off and write something up. Another option is ANR with input from CBI, comes up with a first whack at it based on some input given today, right? Or something else, right? So that's one. The other is, so how are we doing this in a way that works well? We're not like messing up any public meeting laws and things like that, so that folks can reviewing things and working in between meetings. And finally, what kind of agreement do you all want to reach? Trying to work your way to something that's going to push up to the full council. And that's the final bullet. So let me pause for a second. And David, I see your hands up, and I've always, sometimes we try to keep these conversations amongst steering committee members, but let me just do a quick check-in. What's going on, David? Can I be helpful there?
It's an information question, and it's just because I don't know. Who wrote the draft that you sent out to be reviewed?
So
not the draft, but I mean the standing document.
Yeah, standing document came out of sort of like January 2021, where I think the fundamental drafters were us, like CBI, and then it got a couple revisions by the council. It was adopted by the council in early, like Q1, first quarter of 2021, I guess. But yeah, I think it was mostly, the actual pen was a lot of CBI based on input we had received from the council.
Thank you.
That's my memory.
Yeah, thank you, and well done.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so let's just pause here for a sec, and I'm going to keep sharing just for a moment. And what do folks think? There's a document. We've gone through and made a few comments in there saying this is the area we probably need to update here. We'll probably need to update this, right? That's the level of thinking that's gone into it so far. How do you want to do the next step of the sort of options 1, 2, or 3? What do you think is going to work the best? Jared?
Yeah, so I agree with David that I think the kind of working document now has a number of good suggested areas for attention and possible changes. I actually wonder if 1 and 2, my initial preference would be some type of kind of, I don't really see those as mutually exclusive, some type of merged option there. I would love to volunteer. I think it is important that steering committee members are involved in the early stage of it. I would love to participate in that, but I think it would also be helpful given the work that CBI and Climate Action Office staff have been doing in collecting notes and doing this first draft to also be part of that process. So that's my initial feeling. I do think that it's important that we both address a number of the specific questions and concerns that have been raised that need to be addressed with greater clarity in the document. I think we also need to kind of do some, looking ahead to the process that we envision for the next cap and make sure that that we have clarity in the areas that we're going to want to have as smooth a process as possible going forward. And, another one of those came up just at the last council meeting, which we also had to add to the list to this process roadmap document, which is terms for steering committee members, because we, the council agreed to appoint the 4 legislative members of the steering committee, but we did not have clarity on the terms of that appointment, which is another thing we said we would address here. So,
yeah, no, you're right, Jared. Absolutely. So, Bram, and just to as you're talking, I want to not lose the thread of what Jared said of like a merged option 1 and 2. Does that seem like it's working? So, Bram, go ahead, but I don't want to lose that thread.
Yeah. So, my question is, a couple people referred to, the list of feedback or things we've noticed. Is there an actual list?
It's a great question. I don't have a list of things like, oh, here's our 2-page things. You're right. We don't. I think the best thing we have is just the comments in there, which try to synthesize the things we've heard. But you're right, Bram, there isn't a summary of like, here are the 10 points of feedback we've gotten over the last 2 years about process. There isn't a document like that I'm aware of.
Yeah, no, we did. It was facilitated by another person at CBI, but our March meeting was essentially that. So between the minutes and we had sheets of paper, and I believe notes were taken, and I recall much of this arising out of that.
Great, Liz. Yeah, thanks. Right. So the March meeting went into this, and there are good notes from it. Yes. Yeah. Kristen, go ahead, please.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I did want to add that we have like actual notes on giant pieces of paper from that March meeting that laid out a lot of this. I appreciate and recognize what Jared's suggestion of a hybrid. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. But in my experience, process-wise, it is much easier to have folks weigh in on an actual document than it is to have folks combine to create one. And so I guess what I mean by that is that I tend to lean towards option number 2 for A&R and CBI if necessary, to use those notes, incorporate that, leave some kind of placeholders for things that we have talked about as a council through minutes, things like what TJ raised in the chat, term limits, etc., and create kind of a working draft. And then the steering committee, either individually or as a group, can really kind of look at what the working draft is and weigh in or add, or if we missed something or if more specificity is needed. I just think it is quicker and easier to work off of a draft document. And to me, it makes sense that A&R and CBI kind of create that first draft based on the fact that they have the notes. Jane has a lot of kind of institutional knowledge about why things are in there and how reasons why they were incorporated, and also through minutes and notes. I think we have quite a bit of other things to kind of plug in.
Okay. So I want to test how everybody feels about that. First, let me go to Jane and Marion.
Yeah, just in addition about minutes and notes, I feel like I should just be letting Marion speak to this because she reminded me thoughtfully that after the end of the last climate action plan, one of the first things we did was survey the council about process. And we actually we did a survey, we put together a summary and synthesis around changes to process. from the initial climate action plan. That's more than a year old, a year and a half old now. So that's something we, Marion was looking for, and we'll drop in the chat. And it's something that we can use as a basis to revisit as we start drafting, along with the substantive notes that were summarized from those big pieces of paper from the March meeting in writing, which we have also.
Yeah, I think we called it a process reflection, and I know we presented a PowerPoint on it to the council, so I'll find that and put it in the chat.
Nice. That would be really helpful. Okay, so, I wonder if it's, part of this, I'd welcome how people feel about this, but, one approach is we schedule up a steering committee meeting in July, and prior to that, some group of people, whether it's A&R with CBI's help or with a steering committee member or not, comes and prepares that meeting with a new draft, right? A version 0 of the new, rise. So that could be a little bit of a hybrid, what you're talking about, Jared, or it could be, more just A&R and CBI coming prepared to the July meeting so that we could really sit as a group, you all as a steering committee, and go through content together in a public setting. That's one way to do it. I'm just curious how people think about that. Like Jared, when you think about, what Kristen said and like really what would happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that process-wise, regardless of which way we go, I do think it's really important for sake of transparency and being able to follow the discussion and see what's being proposed to be changed or added, that we have a track changes version from what the original process roadmap was to the proposed revisions. And I think that, in that scenario, it's going to be really clear what the proposed changes are and easier to follow. I can see that it would also make sense to have a clean version for folks who just want to see that. But I very much agree that, we need to be working from a common document. We need to be able to see those proposed changes in track changes. And if there's kind of options presented or counselor comments on that, have it all in one place and that all be very transparent. I do think it's important that for the, I think that for later meetings where it really is just kind of collecting feedback and, representing that in a track change document that everybody can see, that may be a staff and consultant role. But I do think that for this first step, where we look at the kind of working document, see if anything else needs to be added to that, I do think it's worth scheduling a meeting where steering committee members, along with A&R staff and CBI, could participate. What I want to avoid is kind of rushing too quickly to create something where we might miss something if we would just take a moment to kind of pause and say, is everything here that we think is here? Let's review those. Let's review the process reflection survey results from after the first CAP. Let's review those notes from the March meeting and what was on that flip chart paper, and each do our own reflection, because other things may have emerged in the interim, including terms for steering committee members, et cetera. So that would be my preference. But either way, I think the most important thing is for everybody to have eyes on this and understand kind of where there have been gaps and what the proposed kind of improvements are that we're seeing track changed versions.
Got it.
I would also add that if we decide to have A&R/CBI do a draft that we can comment on and react to, as long as we know who the right people are to send our thoughts to incorporate into that draft, then that makes it easy.
Yeah. Right. So I wonder if there's a process here where there's like an initial meeting that we have, I say we, if maybe it's even internal, and if one or two of you want to join, that's great. And we can sort of synthesize everything we're seeing across the March meeting notes and from the survey result, which I had forgotten about. And there's sort of like a moment where we sit down and look at that. And if we want to do that before your next steering committee meeting, you know, one or two of you could join on that. And then there's a document that comes out of that that's reviewed in your July meeting. And then further comments can be provided over email based on that conversation in August, something like that. And then in your August steering committee meeting, you end up finalizing the version you want to push up to the full council. Something like that. And as long as, I mean, one of the things we have challenges with is we can't joint edit documents in between meetings. You can send comments to a single unified person like me or Jane or somebody like that. But just we need to be cautious of how we're not tripping ourselves up. Okay. All right. So let me just say that one more time, because I wasn't as clear that over the next few weeks, there's going to be a moment in which probably Jane and myself, and Julie had to step away for a second. I really want to get her opinion on this. But there's going to be a moment over the next few weeks where we get together and there's Julie, and try to say, what are we hearing from the March meeting notes, from the survey, from these other things that have come up. And so what is it we need to do in this document, basically? And from that, somebody grabs a pen and takes a whack at writing, right? And that gets pushed back to all of you. And we'll talk about that in the steering committee meeting in late July. And we'll do that. That'll be the focus of that July meeting. And then after that, you're able to send detailed additional comments, written comments, which can get folded into a revised version of that, and which we'll review again and finalize for the full council August. Yeah. Let me just check in with Julie for a second, because you were off for a bit. What I'm describing, does that work for you as well?
It does. I only missed a couple of minutes there.
Okay.
Sorry.
Super. Yeah, no worries. Okay. Others, does that work? Yeah, I see a thumbs up. Liz, that's good. Okay. Kelly's thumbs up as well. Great. All right, so let's do that. I have been off for a few days, so I forgot that we actually do. You all, the steering committee, do have meetings scheduled in your calendars, right? So if you look at your calendars, you're going to see once a month meetings. We have one next month on July 24th. That's Monday at 8:30, like this time. August 28th, right? And we have them going into September, October, November. So those are on your calendars, and those will be, unless we decide to change them today, those will be our sort of touch points to do this.
So just in case Kelly's unable to comment due to breakfast schedule, Kelly had said that before 9 a.m. With kids and everything else is a little bit difficult. And I think Jane had said the 8:30 start time had been to accommodate a steering committee member who has rolled off. Those Monday mornings are good for me. And maybe if we can adjust the time by some small amount to make it work for everyone, that'd be great.
Thanks, Bram. That's helpful. Liz?
I have a standing 10 o'clock meeting on Mondays that I can't avoid or miss. So we could certainly do 9, but it would just be an hour-long meeting. Or I could leave the half hour at the end, but that's probably not ideal to plan.
Yeah. Okay. And Kelly's saying she's okay with keeping it, but thanks, Bram, for being attentive to that. All right. So before we go full into scheduling mode here, I just want to make sure we have the plan in place we need to. I think we covered it all. Just let me check quickly on process stuff. Are there other points of process of how we want to handle rewriting this governance document that weren't covered in my summary of the plan? Is there anything else that we need to say about how to get this stuff done?
So with the plan that we have discussed, is the right person to send comments and thoughts for incorporation into the first draft? Should those go to Jane, ?
Jane, and I would suggest Jane and copy me, but I'm open to other thoughts. That work for you, Jane, as well? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, yeah, so Bram, I think that's probably the call. Just as an FYI, I'm actually gonna be out for the next 10, 12 days, so you'll get an auto response from me, so definitely Jane should be your primary contact in that. All right. Okay, so that's good. So let's do two things. One is, I think because we have a little time, without dragging ourselves deep into this, I'd just be interested if, in addition to these two sources of information we just talked about, which were the March meeting notes, the survey at the end of the initial climate action plan, TJ's point in the chat, Jared's reminder that we need to do, amongst the things we need to do, steering committee terms. Are there other things that you think haven't been sufficiently lifted up yet that we definitely should be looking at as we update this document? And this is a little bit of slippery slope that I don't want to slide fully down it, but I do want to say, if there are things that really need attention as we pull together a new draft on this, I just want to create a little space for that. Let's just take a few minutes now. If there's anything that people know that maybe hasn't been highlighted sufficiently in those March notes or elsewhere. So let me pause. Are there things that are burning in people's minds where you're like, if you're going to be writing the new draft, you absolutely can't forget the following? Let me just pause for a second. Jared?
Yeah, there's a few things that come to mind. One is what Kelly just put in the chat, and I think is already addressed somewhat in the working draft, which is more clarity on the subcommittee membership and process.
Yeah.
I think one thing I'm also going to want to do and would raise up for others is just to go back and reread the Solutions Act to make sure that as we're looking ahead at that, the next cap and the responsibilities that we're charged with in that law, that I think it's just a good kind of in a very important reference point. There's nothing obvious to me that is kind of missing from the process roadmap based on that, but I do want to just go back to and cross-reference the draft of the roadmap with the kind of charge that's laid out to us in the law. And then the other piece is, oh shoot, I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm forgetting it now. If it comes back to me, I'll either raise my hand or put it in the chat.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, absolutely. Please do. It will come back. Liz?
Two things. One is Just Transition Subcommittee put together their recommendations on how subcommittee, actual reports and eventual Climate Council recommendations get reviewed and adopted. It looks close to what this initial draft, the process roadmap broadly outlined, but it feels like it would be a good thing to do to just either directly attach that, as my memory is it was adopted by the council, or revised to make it consistent at a minimum. And then the corollary is, to the extent other subcommittees haven't yet been asked, or haven't had a chance to do it yet, it might be smart to have them just read the subcommittee sections over the summer at their next summer meeting and just see whether there are things within it that they want to bring forward to us as changes. They're obviously going to have a chance when we send a draft out, but it might be worth some summer work if they have a meeting.
That's super. Thanks, Liz. Great. Anything else that's sort of top of mind for folks that we want to make sure is there? Secretary Glauser?
So I think we should include a conflict of interest provision. I've received several complaints as chair from different entities complaining of that, and the statute addresses it a little bit, but not clearly enough. So I think clarity would be helpful, both to respond to complaints received, but more importantly, to give some guidance to council members about what their responsibilities are for disclosure and what statutes apply, and give folks a little help in navigating this.
Super. Thanks. That sounds like a great idea. Anything else? Okay. All righty. And if folks don't have the version with the visible comments, let us know. We'll make sure. It might just be a problem with my reader, but we've distributed, this has been in previous agendas and stuff, but if you needed a reminder, just let me know. All right. I think then the last thing we wanted to do is look at dates, and I want to just circle back the agenda for 1 second. So what we have, Jane, can I ask a favor of you here, which is, so what exactly would we most need right now from steering committee members? Would we also want help with a council date for September? Do we need to confirm that time slot, which sounds like Kelly can make it work and others seem to be okay? What's most helpful right now, Jane?
For me, I put this on with you, thinking mostly about Kelly and Graham, just to confirm in process that the times that are scheduled, which are 8:30 to 10. I think the next one it looks like is July 24th. Yep. And then there would be one the third week of August. Make sure those work. And then I hadn't been looking ahead. We as a steering committee scheduled a year of meetings, I believe. And I believe as a steering committee at your last meeting, not the short one that we approved the agenda, but the previous one in May, we highlighted a need or interest for the council to meet quarterly. So September was on my mind as the next meeting of the council, but we've neglected to schedule those. So presuming that nothing has changed with teaching schedules and folks' commitments, Mondays have always historically been the best because as we move into the legislative session, it doesn't conflict with the legislature. So I can reach out to Leslie Ann and ask her specifically if she knows her schedule for the fall, make sure Mondays likely will still work. And then assuming that, and rather than polling the group, which tends to not yield anything productive, I'll just say, I would just schedule the meeting, Marion and I would schedule the meeting as we have traditionally for 11 to 2 for one in September, probably the week after the steering committee scheduled, and one in December, the week after the steering committee scheduled.
Right. Okay. So let me just then take those in pieces. Let me triple confirm for steering committee members and meetings, this 8:30, 10 o'clock slot seems to work. Bram, does it work for you as well? Yeah. Okay, great. And the dates that are in your calendars right now, at least in mine, are July 24th, and then the final week of August, in August 28th. That's what's in my calendar right now. So let me just double check that we've got a quorum for those dates. And if somebody would push strongly for a different Monday, now's the time to do that for your summer meetings.
Yeah, I think I just want to what Jared just put into the chat. I mean, those dates are all fine, but I think Jane had said she wanted to schedule the September council meeting for the week after the steering committee, and there are no Mondays after the steering committee Monday in September.
Graham anticipated why we raised our hand. I'm not sure why we scheduled the steering committee's meetings for the 4th Monday, but if folks are supportive, I would just move the fall ones in particular up a week on the steering committee. So they would be the 3rd Mondays, and then put the council as the 4th Monday.
Yeah.
That works fine for me.
Great.
Okay. So expect that change starting in September. For just a quick clarification, then on July 24th, August 28th, are we going to have a quorum there, and that's going to work for everybody? Okay, great. Super. So we've got those 2 dates. We'll be bumping up starting in September by 1 week. We'll do it on the 3rd week of the month, and then the council most likely on the 4th week of the month. Jane, you and I haven't spoken about this, but it's just a little piece in my head. I wonders whether 1 week ahead is the right rhythm for a council. I'd be interested in steering committee members as well. Like, would it actually be better to do it 2 weeks ahead of the council meeting, because that gives you time to like get materials out and things like that?
That would be fine.
Yeah. Liz, that sound right?
Yeah, typically we've reviewed the draft agenda before it's gone out. So that feels like probably better process.
Right.
Or a different day if 2 weeks is too early, you know?
Right. I think that the 2 weeks, yeah, thanks, Kelly. I see that in the chat. Yeah. The 2 weeks makes sense to me, just from a rhythm standpoint of like getting out agenda, getting out materials. It allows us to work together on that. Okay, let's do that. So it'll be more like the 2nd week of the month will be steering committee, and the final week of the month will be the council. All right. I'm not sure there's other scheduling things to talk about. Are there other things I'm forgetting right now? Is that it?
So just to confirm then, are we saying that it would be September 11th would be the steering committee from 8:30 to 10, and that would be basically following just 2 weeks after our one in August, if we keep that at August 28th, which may be good in terms of keeping momentum on the process roadmap revisions. But I just wanted to clarify that that's what we're talking about. Okay.
I think that sounds good. Sounds good to me. Okay. Super.
December is going to be tricky.
Right.
Since the 4th Monday is Christmas Day.
Yes, that's not going to work.
And if we
We
did
can
the
just do
second
the-
Monday,
Yeah, we can do the 2nd Monday in December for steering committee and the 3rd Monday for council. I think that's fine.
Okay.
I think we'll have to change for October too, because the 2nd Monday in October is Indigenous Peoples' Day.
Yeah. Right. And then we may shift later on the 16th and the 30th kind of thing. Okay. So if folks are okay with Jane sort of managing schedules and doing that and sending that out, and when we have problems like that, like a holiday on a Monday, shifting it appropriately. Okay. Okay, so that's what we had for our agenda. I want to make a space if for public comment. Before I go to public comment, are there other things scheduling wise, otherwise, that the steering committee members want to bring up? I've got a quick question for you all on scheduling wise, and which is the interest that you all have in trying to find some in-person time with the council in the fall versus full virtual. I think, you know, there's pros and cons, and it'll be interesting to think about that. I'm not sure there's a decision you need to make right now, but it's something on my mind. I feel like the council, you know, there's an efficiency in doing this online, and there may be an emotional benefit and other benefits for getting together. So something on my mind for food for thought. Secretary Moore.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer that another organization I'm involved in has gone to having 2 intentionally in-person meetings every year and the rest of them fully remote. And I think that sort of cadence and balance is helpful. It allows us to continue to do some of the informal networking and relationship building that I think only really occurs in the in-person meetings, and yet balances that with what, as you say, David, it's a lot of driving potentially for people to be able to attend in person. We've gone to the point, though, of not offering a remote participation version for the in-person meetings, both to drive participation from members in person, but to also sort of cut down on the challenges of some of the hybrid meeting format, which I see as kind of the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, that's a wonderful strategy. Jared?
Yeah, I had a similar question and would pose it to either Secretary Clauser or Secretary Moore. It goes back to what I was actually thinking about for something, wondering whether we may need to address in the process roadmap, is when I look at the when I look at our calendars for you know, the meeting that has the Zoom link. Thanks, buddy. It has this note that physical meeting location is suspended due to the open meeting law temporary provisions, and I don't have a sense of the timeline for, you know, what's anticipated for how temporary those are, when and if we may need to change our meeting format as a council or as subcommittees. So I understand we may not know that yet, but I just want to kind of flag that if there is any additional information, it would be helpful to have it both for kind of how we schedule our meetings going forward this fall and into next year, but also if there's anything we need to anticipate to be prepared to address in our process roadmap.
Interesting, Jared. Yeah. If someone has an answer for that, think about that for 1 second. Let me go to Bram's hand and then we'll go there. Bram?
I want to say it's my observation that electronic communications, whether it be Zoom or email or phone, are more effective between and among people who have met each other in real life. And, you know, whether of the 4 council meetings a year, we do 2 in person or 1 in person, you know, I don't have strong feelings either way, but I think I do have strong feelings about doing at least 1 in person.
Yeah. Thanks, Bram. Yeah. Great. And does anybody have an answer to Jared's question about the sort of the rules?
The temporary provision goes through July 1st of 2024, but just want to reflect that we have operated without it in the past, and that you can still meet remotely. You just have to have a physical location for members of the public to join, and that's when you would see one of us sitting in a room by ourselves to make sure that we had a physical location for staff, for public or participants of the council to join us. So I don't think it has to change the way you meet, but it can and could be discussed.
Super. Thanks, Jane. So I'm hearing a strong interest in at least once a year, if not twice, getting together in person as a way of building the kind of relationships that allow you to have effective virtual meetings as well. So let's take that in, and I wonder, we can think about the practicalities of that. And Jane, maybe you and I can do some thinking about how to strategically suggest something there. And we can in July, when we all as a steering committee meet again in July, talk about sort of the outcome of that thinking. Does that sound good for everybody? Okay. Great. Super. All right. Okay, so I would say if folks have been listening in who aren't steering committee members who would love to weigh in on what we've been discussing today, it's a good time. Let's do some public comment. If anybody would like to make comment, feel free to raise your hand. We're a pretty small group today, so feel free to just unmute yourself and check in as well. Any folks from the public want to do some comment? Okay. All right. I think we've done everything we set out to do today. But I will do a pause and say anything else, unfinished business that we want to check in on right now? Okay. So what you'll see from us, in addition to the notes from this meeting, is you'll see a sort of, hey, this is when we're going to gather to talk about starting that revision process of the document. You'll see prior to the July 24th meeting a draft, so that we can really use that July 24th meeting to get into the weeds on content. And then there'll be a process in between the July 24th and August 28th, so that specific written comment, written input from each of you steering committee members can be incorporated in to a new draft. And in the meantime, Bram and others, if you want to send some thoughts, written thoughts in, send it to Jane, and please copy me. All righty. That's it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Next month.
Everybody, bye.
Yep.
Bye.